Thank you, Laura, and also thank you to the organizers, amongst which Rebecca, for the invitation to this conference to thank. I enjoyed speaking and attending at the Transforming Collections conference last week in Eindhoven, so I also would like to thank Susan, who will join us later. And I feel privileged to be sharing more on collecting otherwise with you. So the paper that I will be presenting will first set up where the Collecting Otherwise project is situated in the Nieuwe Instituut, which you see like our new logo here, and there's no mistake in how it's spelled. Then I'll take the time to guide you through the groundwork of Collecting Otherwise, including fundamental questions, which I believe can be translated to any project seeking to make impact in the collections field, as well as the different publishing facets and public activations explored in Collecting Otherwise, before taking you to the tool shed, which is going to be very exciting. I'll be speaking on challenges and best practices. So the Nieuwe Instituut is the Netherlands' National Museum for Architecture, Design and Digital Cultures, located in Rotterdam. And the Nieuwe Instituut focuses on important social developments, such as the housing shortage, the energy transition, the rise of artificial intelligence, mobility, and the use of public space. And we keep the National Collection for Dutch Architecture and Urban Planning, which I will be referring to quite often later, which is one of the largest architecture collections in the world. The Institute's depot contains 4 million items, so you can only imagine how much work it takes to describe them and to create proximity to them. And through its agency department, the Nieuwe Instituut showcases the work of designers, brings people into contact with each other, and collects, develops, and shares knowledge. At the same time, the Nieuwe Instituut's research collective, we don't call ourselves a department anymore, we call ourselves a collective. We advance post-disciplinary and multilingual knowledge practices, moving beyond the traditional divide between theory-centric academic research and practical embodied forms of knowing. The collective's practices are involved with research as a collaborative public activity aimed at creating a society that sustains all life. The primary focus of our research projects is to produce knowledge that can bring theory into practice in various contexts, through tool sheds and research hubs. So, over the course of the past years, the Nieuwe Instituut is bringing overlooked actors, unacknowledged agents, and forgotten stories into the discussion by examining the roles that archives, which are housed in our collections, play in the construction of the history of cities and their inhabitants, as well as to contest institutional memory and the dominant historiography. In tandem, our artistic director, Eric Chen, has defined the concept of the testing ground to articulate the speculative testing research practices as foundational for the institution's agenda-setting mandate. And Collecting Otherwise, as you could see in this diagram, is a collaborative project between the research and collections teams and part of the larger 4-year framework of disclosing architecture, under the umbrella of the Rethinking the Collection initiative. Since 2020, Collecting Otherwise is one of the driving projects serving this ambition to disclose, create proximity to, and enlarge the understandings around the National Collection for Architecture and Urban Planning. At its inception, 97% of the collection consisted of white, cis-male authored archives. Meanwhile, we have helped acquire over a dozen archives and supplements and identified more archives of interest as well as key contextual additions to existing archives. So Collecting Otherwise approaches heritage as a public and collective negotiation, one that happens beyond the archive rooms and the expertise of archivists. Rather than understanding heritage as neutral and objective inheritance, Collecting Otherwise researches how certain collection choices are made, how heritage practices have developed, and what the consequences of these choices are. So our previous iterations, and you see them lined up here in the slightly less impressive diagram, but it will come, like we are still in the midst of the project. Our previous iterations were Seen Unseen, so that was 2021, on intersectional feminisms and queering. So we took a deep dive into the collection and collection case studies and went to seek out that which was previously thought as not there, simply not there, or gaps in the collection. And we thought, well, what does it actually take to see these gaps, not only as marginal spaces, but really at the core of our collections. And the second year was on post-decolonial, where we explored strategies for resituating colonial heritage and retooling archival processes dealing with such heritages. And I think in this iteration, we took on the assumption that a Dutch national collection in architecture and urban planning is not an ethnographic collection. And actually, there's a lot of ethnographic material in our collection. And being able to name that, being able to see that, and being able to research that with adequate expertise, that was the outset of the second year, so last year. And this year, we will get into the toolshed. So this year's iteration is called a toolshed, a testing ground for tools and methodologies. And this means that we are collaboratively with the people in the project and people who we do not know yet, but really would like to work with. We will transform Collecting Otherwise from a project with a finite timeline to toolshed, a space, durational, generative space, which we can inhabit collectively to test out tools and methodologies thus far developed in Collecting Otherwise, and in the past iterations in an explicitly applied manner at the Nieuwe Instituut. And I will expand a bit more on this iteration later. So the iterations move along sediments of questions that linger on. And these questions challenge the project-based or otherwise erosive time spans of applied research in cultural institutions and academia. Because if you are spending time to reinvent the wheel every year, stopping to invent new questions, not taking the questions on of previous years, you're actually halting your progress. So how we work forms around the practice of returning, and this takes from Karen Barad, turning questions over and over. It is based on relations that are intended to endure, to spill over in the non-institutional, providing the foundations for connections that strengthen and formulate urgencies anew. These core questions pull our national collection in an international light. They deal with the historical implications of our national legacies and thus engage seriously with resituating and decolonizing. So in this first iteration, we focused on what the institution's role is in enacting redress, and whose heritage are we collecting and recollecting, and who is currently caring for this heritage. How does the institution change along with these urgencies? And who has been working in the institution so far? And how can we be collectively accountable for change? So to complement our second iteration, put forward questions around design exchanges, entanglements, and reckoning with these entanglements. And this is, for instance, a couple of those questions. And I will take out this one. So how can we advance tools for local archives to be activated, and with it the awareness around contested local architectural legacies invigorated? So this question also propelled forward the third iteration, because we were thinking, how can we share the ideas and the methodologies that we have been thinking of within this project. So here our working group proved to be indispensable. So in Collecting Otherwise, we work through and with a working group. And this working group signals urgencies and positioned the discussions around collections and archives as a learning space beyond the confines of the Nieuwe Instituut. And this specific paragraph, it's actually part of a larger statement by the to-be-determined Trojan horse cell. And that's Clara Balaguer, Alfred Marasigan, Zar Christoph, and Isola Tong. And that's one of the cells in our working group, and they situate themselves between the Philippines, the Netherlands, and the United States. And in the middle of the first iteration, they put forward that they actually didn't identify anymore so much with collecting otherwise as such, unless we would adapt and reposition our statement and actually take into account that collecting otherwise happens in a very situated way, and we should take into account the different geographical contexts that we also seek to reach out to. So as I said, the working group is a fundamental aspect of the project, as it allows us to unfold the initial project statement along collectively defined key ambitions, questions, and sub-projects done in the working group cells, such as the Trojan horse cell. And the group was constituted in December 2020, so we've actually spent a long time together, which also is beneficial to the project. You get more comfortable with each other and more comfortable in asking these questions and positioning yourselves towards the collection. So the working group sessions vary from close readings of particular archival material to mukbangs, collective care writer sessions, toolshed development, and participations by guest speakers. And it all revolves around signaling urgencies around the case study materials that I'm showing here behind us. And again, reiterating, we do have an ethnographic counterpart to our collection. And in the project, we commit to a dedicated intersectional feminist lens, taking care for the archive and the archival community as being as prerequisites to the project. So, of course, then what does it mean to take care? And in which sense should we be aware of not reproducing colonial power imbalances? So apart from the considered context of care and feminist practice, we also find post-custodial thinking fundamental to our approach. And Pip already signaled this. And here you have like a full quote, so you can also look up. So what post-custodial thinking, if you perhaps stating the obvious, but so, for instance, in our work with the archival care writer, we use post-custodial thinking. And in the archival care writer, we outline additional contractual agreements and modes of archival activation. So instead of an archive being directly donated, having a singular contract, and that's it, we're actually getting into a negotiation in this pilot with the donors, seeking out how they would like to activate their archive over the course of the next couple years. And we ran this initial pilot with donors of the Women Building Housing Network, who were active in the 80s and 90s, who now have bequeathed their archives to the Nieuwe Instituut. And we've done a great deal of projects with them, including an oral her story trajectory, which is another great pilot. So in the past 3 years, we've tested out various modes of publishing knowledge around the collections with our working group members and our respective networks. And we see these practices as vehicles for defining the capacities of the archives and testing the public interfaces to the collection and its enclosed legacy. So we've done early on just public moments, getting out there, asking our questions in a public fashion. Then last year, and also spilling over in this year, we've developed a workshop together with our Indonesian partners, Good School and Architecture Indonesia, to create more proximity and access to our collections, because a large deal of the Dutch National Collection actually consists of buildings that are now situated in Indonesia. To small exhibitions, research exhibitions in Indonesia, publishing, like zine making, smaller working group gatherings like expert gatherings. We've done walks, so we've done a family fest. There are just a lot of things that you can test out and think about how to bring collections to a general audience and to think about these questions. So we consider the values and questions and these types of interventions from which we depart as our tools. And echoing Audre Lorde, can we reappropriate the master's tools to rethink, reconfigure, and redistribute the lived and living spaces that keep our legacies? So talking about the toolshed now, which is this year and hopefully our upcoming years, considering collecting otherwise project as a toolshed. Well, the toolshed is an accommodating, accessible space that distributes resources to archival communities. And the toolshed allows for commoning tools, redistributing of skills, and responsiveness to particular cases or phenomena. The toolshed moves between pause, reflection, rest, and shifting directions. And the toolshed is opposed to a toolkit. So the toolshed can be developed within your own institutions, but it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. You have to put work into the toolshed. So this year's engagements will underline the iterative and accessible nature of the toolshed as a space with a lower threshold. And this is one of our earlier sort of kind of thinking through what the toolshed is and what we put in the toolshed 1.0. And the tools explicitly can be used, retrofitted, and developed as elsewhere than their inception at the Nieuwe Instituut and its collection. In other archival and heritage institutions, with archival communities, for instance, architects and architectural practices, with specific attention to underrepresented communities and the alternate spaces in which archives and collections originate. So these community spaces. So, and I also think that the toolshed does not seek to reinvent the tool if there's already a nicely working hammer that we can borrow from our neighbors. So we, for instance, base our work with the asterisk, which you can see here, and I hope to tell a bit more later, on the Words Matter project that was already mentioned by the Research Center for Material Cultures. So it's not about thinking that, oh, we can do it all by ourselves. No, by all means, we need input. And at the same time, this is a generative space. We can work together for specific contexts. So we are currently in the process of documenting these tools. If you scroll down on this page, you will see many more, and hopefully towards the end of the year, just an abundance of ideas. So the toolshed grants space for more tooling or shedding, with windows ensuring exchanges to the outside world. The toolshed does not build with a fixed outcome in mind, but rather exists as a testing ground to negotiate archival research and methodologies. So one of the tools that we consider part of the toolshed is the asterisk, co-developed with working group members Alfred Marsigan and Hannah Dawn Henderson and many colleagues in the collections department. So this is actually one of the pilots that we are very actively taking on with the collections department and making sure that they get a good understanding of what research is into the collections or sort of how to take the speculative and put it into the practical realm. And I would also say that the asterisk operates as a wild card or joker, signaling momentary spaces of doubt and the need to reflect on absences or definitions as collective becoming. So the asterisk is a tool that addresses and works on the need for a more thorough, critical, and contextualized way of describing archival objects. And here, one of the fundamental questions was, how do we attend to the lives of people documented in architectural archives? And to think this through and to occupy the space for annotation, that's the goal of the asterisk. So we operate the asterisk space as a footnote that tests the capacity of internal infrastructures, archival infrastructures, such as the backend infrastructure of XCL, which then translates to the front end, by adding new descriptions, alternative titles, or engaging with materials. To describe collection materials stemming from the multivocal knowledges and advise on registration guidelines for future, more contextualized, historical sensitive, and critical approaches to archival descriptions and metadata. And I will take 1 or 2 more minutes. Sorry, I see on the clock that my time has run out. But the asterisk also addresses underexposed collection items in the collections interfaces. And this is a new interface that we're currently developing. And we're already doing a first couple tests with the asterisk to see where we could fit this negotiation space. So, and the future horizon is to include footnote spaces which are usable and editable by the visiting audience, who we consider experts of many of these legacies, not only leaving room initially for invited researchers or colleagues from the collections department. So we really seek to branch out and make sure that a lot of people can annotate in these spaces and leave behind their knowledges. So if you're enthusiastic to learn more, I keenly invite you to our hybrid Zoom meeting on May 25th, which is called the Toolshed on Neighborly Borrowing. Or please say hi to me or my colleague Ramon Amaro, who's also here, to talk further about what we do with In Collecting Otherwise or the Digital Cultures Hub. Thank you so much.